There is a force inside every human being that is rarely talked about in a positive way, a force that shapes decisions, changes behaviors, and quietly alters the course of a life. That force is avoidance. Most people treat avoidance like an enemy, like a flaw, like a weakness that must be defeated or ignored. But avoidance does not exist in you by accident. It appears for a reason. It speaks because something within you is demanding attention. And when you learn to understand it, when you learn to use it instead of fight it, avoidance becomes one of the most powerful motivators you have. Avoidance tells you where your fears lie. It tells you where your insecurities hide. It reveals the places where your potential is being suffocated. People avoid the very actions that would transform their lives. They avoid the conversations that would heal them, the risks that would elevate them, the habits that would empower them. And yet, if you look closely, avoidance is not weakness. It is a map. Whatever you avoid is the doorway you are meant to walk through. Whatever you avoid is the opportunity calling your name. Whatever you avoid is the next step in your evolution. But to harness the motivation of avoidance, you must stop running from the discomfort it brings. Avoidance always carries tension. You know the feeling. The tightening in your chest when you think about something you've been postponing. The heavy sigh when you remember a responsibility you keep pushing aside. The knot in your stomach when you imagine confronting something you don't feel ready for. Most people interpret that tension as a sign to retreat. They distract themselves, justify their delay, build excuses, and convince themselves that later is the right time. But later is a lie that has stolen more dreams than failure ever could. Avoidance thrives in the illusion of later. It whispers, not today. You're tired. You're stressed. You're overwhelmed. You're unprepared. It says, tomorrow will be better. Tomorrow you'll be stronger. Tomorrow you'll feel ready. But tomorrow is just a softer version of avoidance. You have lived through enough tomorrows to know that waiting for the perfect moment is another form of running away. The truth is that avoidance is not simply trying to stop you. It is trying to show you something. It exposes the things that matter. People don't avoid what means nothing to them. They avoid what has the power to change them, challenge them, or reveal something vulnerable. Avoidance grows in the presence of meaning. That means if you feel the pull to avoid something, it is not a sign of insignificance. It is a sign of importance. Imagine for a moment the tasks you complete easily. They don't provoke fear. They don't create tension. They don't awaken inner conflict. They don't require transformation. But the things you avoid, those things demand a higher version of you. They require courage, discipline, honesty, or self-awareness. They demand growth. That is why you avoid them, because they stretch you. You avoid what will expand you. And this is where the motivation of avoidance becomes powerful. If you learn to run toward what you normally run from, you begin to unlock the exact areas where your strength is waiting to rise. You begin to live on the edges of your potential instead of the shadows of your doubt. You begin to stop settling for the familiar and start moving toward the meaningful. But to do this, you must redefine your relationship with discomfort. People avoid because discomfort feels like danger. The human brain is wired to seek safety, predictability, and control. It resists anything that feels like risk or uncertainty. But discomfort is not danger. Discomfort is the birthplace of personal evolution. Discomfort is the arena where character is built. Discomfort is the place where truths are revealed and limits are dissolved. If you train yourself to step into discomfort instead of avoiding it, you will discover that the very things you feared were never as destructive as you imagined. Fear exaggerates. Avoidance distorts. The task itself is rarely as heavy as carrying the weight of avoiding it. Avoidance drains you. It fills your mind with constant reminders, steals your peace, lowers your energy, and turns simple actions into mental mountains. When you finally confront something you've avoided, you often wonder why you let it consume you for so long. Because the real burden wasn't the task. The real burden was the avoidance itself. And once you realize this, you begin to understand that avoidance can be a compass. It points to the exact experiences that will lighten your emotional load, strengthen your identity, and restore your inner power. But the most transformative part of the motivation of avoidance is this: every time you do something you've been avoiding, you reclaim a piece of yourself. You gather evidence that you are capable, resilient, and adaptable. You replace hesitation with momentum. And momentum is one of the most powerful forces in a human life. Once you start moving toward the things you fear, you create a shift in your self-image. You begin to see yourself as someone who acts instead of avoids, someone who confronts instead of escapes, someone who grows instead of hides, and that shift changes everything. The world does not reward avoidance. It rewards courage. It rewards effort. It rewards those who are willing to pursue the uncomfortable truths. But the world also rewards those who understand the power of emotion. Avoidance is rooted in emotion, not logic. And that means the solution is not to force yourself into action through willpower alone. It is to understand the message behind the emotion. Avoidance says, I fear this. But if you dig deeper, the fear rarely concerns the task itself. It concerns the meaning behind it. You don't avoid the gym. You avoid the discomfort of confronting your health. You don't avoid starting the project. You avoid the pressure of proving your ability. You don't avoid the conversation. You avoid vulnerability or conflict. Every act of avoidance has an emotional truth beneath it. And when you uncover that truth, you reveal what your life is asking you to address. That truth is motivation. That truth is direction. That truth is fuel. Imagine if you approached avoidance with curiosity instead of shame. Instead of berating yourself for procrastinating, escaping, or delaying, imagine asking yourself a simple question. What is this trying to show me? Because avoidance is feedback. It is a signal that you're standing in front of something meaningful. It is an emotional arrow pointing you toward a part of your life that needs your courage. When you learn to decode avoidance, you learn to unlock the precise areas of growth that will elevate you. And when you act in those areas, you accelerate your evolution far faster than in any area where you feel comfortable. But let's be honest, moving toward the things you avoid is not easy. It requires emotional strength, self-awareness, and a willingness to confront your internal resistance. But the reward is extraordinary. You begin to break patterns that have held you back for years. You build discipline in the exact places where you've lacked it. You expand your limits in the areas that matter most. And slowly your life begins to shift. Your confidence grows. Your inner dialogue changes. You begin to trust yourself more deeply because confidence is not built through winning. It is built through confronting what you once ran from. Confidence is the memory of overcoming discomfort. People think confidence is what leads to action, but it's the opposite. Action leads to confidence, especially action taken in the presence of avoidance. Every time you push through avoidance, you build emotional proof that you can handle difficulty, and that emotional proof becomes the foundation of inner strength. To run on the motivation of avoidance, you must create a simple rule for yourself. The more I resist something, the sooner I must face it. Not because you enjoy discomfort, but because you refuse to let avoidance dictate your destiny. This rule transforms avoidance from an obstacle into a guide. It forces you to lean into your growth instead of escaping from it. Imagine how your life would look if you consistently confronted the things you avoided. Imagine the goals you would finally pursue, the habits you would finally build, the conversations you would finally have, the opportunities you would finally seize. Imagine the inner peace that would come from no longer dragging the weight of unmade decisions. Imagine the power you would feel waking up each day knowing you no longer negotiate with avoidance. Because avoidance steals your energy long before it steals your actions. It drains you through anticipation, through guilt, through mental noise. The cure is not to think less about what you avoid. The cure is to act. Action silences avoidance. Movement dissolves fear. Progress destroys hesitation. And once you learn to turn avoidance into motion, you will discover a deeper truth. Avoidance is not the barrier you thought it was. It is the path. It points you to the exact areas where your life is waiting to expand. It reveals the edges of your potential. It shows you where you must grow next. In those moments, when you approach the very things you once feared, you feel something you haven't felt in a long time. You feel alive. You feel powerful. You feel in control of your own life again. You realize that avoidance was never your enemy. It was your teacher. There is a moment in every person's life when avoidance becomes unbearable. Not because the task grows bigger, not because the situation becomes more difficult, but because your spirit becomes too heavy from carrying the weight of what you have not faced. Avoidance doesn't simply delay action, it accumulates pressure. It builds layers of restlessness, guilt, frustration, and self-doubt. It fills your mind with a quiet noise that never seems to stop, a noise that whispers, "You still haven't handled this. You still aren't dealing with this. And eventually, that noise gets loud enough that something inside you snaps. Not in weakness, but in awakening. There comes a day when you realize the thing you've been avoiding is not going away on its own. Avoidance doesn't erase responsibility. It doesn't dissolve fear. It doesn't make the task easier. It only increases the distance between who you are and who you know you can become. And when that realization hits, you're faced with a choice: continue running or turn toward the very thing you've been fleeing and finally confront it. This moment, the turning point, is one of the most powerful moments a human being can experience. Because it marks the end of avoidance's control over your life. It marks the moment you shift from being dragged by your fears to directing your own path. And that shift always begins with one brave decision: I'm done avoiding this. It doesn't matter what this is. It might be a conversation you've postponed for years. It might be a dream you've buried under excuses. It might be a habit you've promised yourself 1,000 times you'd begin. It might be a truth you've refused to acknowledge. It might be a risk you've convinced yourself you're not ready for. Whatever it is, facing it changes you. Not because the action itself is extraordinary, but because the act of facing what you avoid is a declaration of self-respect. Avoidance thrives on powerlessness. It feeds on hesitation. It gains strength every time you say, I'll deal with it later. But the moment you take action, avoidance collapses. It crumbles under the weight of your courage. And it loses its grip on your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who hides from difficulty and start seeing yourself as someone who steps into it. You begin to reclaim your agency, your confidence, your momentum. And that momentum becomes a powerful force in your life. Because once you confront one thing you've been avoiding, you begin to wonder, what else have I let fear take from me? And you start confronting those things too. You lean into discomfort instead of shrinking from it. You pursue challenges instead of resisting them. You stop waiting for permission and start creating opportunity. The truth is, avoidance doesn't disappear all at once. Even the strongest people feel the pull of avoidance. It's human, it's natural, it's emotional. But what changes is your mindset. Avoidance stops being a command and starts being a signal. It stops being an obstacle and becomes a guide. When something inside you says, I don't want to deal with this, you lean closer instead of turning away. You examine the discomfort. You ask yourself why you're resisting. You search for the fear beneath the hesitation, because avoidance is never about laziness. It's about fear. Fear of failing, fear of embarrassment, fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of change, fear of success, fear of responsibility, fear of the unknown. These fears hide beneath the surface of your avoidance. When you bring them into the light, they lose their mystery. They lose their power. You realize that what you feared was often an illusion, an exaggerated version of reality built by your mind in an attempt to protect you. The mind loves comfort. It loves certainty. It loves routine. Anything that threatens those things triggers avoidance. But you were not born for comfort alone. You were not born to live a small, safe, predictable life. You were born with the capacity to evolve, adapt, create, impact, and overcome. Growth is your natural state. Expansion is your destiny. And avoidance, when understood correctly, becomes the compass pointing you toward that growth. The uncomfortable truth is this: your life will only change when you confront the things you would rather escape. Every breakthrough you desire sits behind a door you've been avoiding. Every transformation you seek requires facing something uncomfortable. Avoidance surrounds the areas that matter most. You avoid healing because healing changes you. You avoid challenges because challenge strengthens you. You avoid risk because risk transforms you. You avoid truth because truth frees you. Everything you want is on the other side of something you don't want to face. But imagine what would happen if you made a promise to yourself today, right now, that you will no longer let avoidance dictate your destiny. Imagine what would happen if you decided that the things you resist the most will become the things you face first. Imagine the momentum you would create. Imagine the emotional freedom you would gain. Imagine the identity you would build by becoming the kind of person who looks fear in the eye and acts anyway. That identity is powerful. It is unshakable. It is undeniable. It is the identity of someone who doesn't run from life. They run toward it. Someone who doesn't retreat from challenges. They rise into them. Someone who isn't controlled by fear. They confront fear and convert it into strength. Avoidance is emotional energy. and all emotional energy can be transformed. Fear can become excitement. Hesitation can become urgency. Resistance can become determination. Avoidance can become motivation. When you take the energy you've been using to escape and redirect it into action, you unlock a level of drive you didn't know you possessed. Because avoidance requires effort. It takes mental power to ignore something. It takes emotional power to suppress something. It takes psychological power to postpone something. You've been using energy all along, you've just been using it against yourself. When you reverse that flow, when you take the energy you've been wasting on avoidance and channel it into forward motion, you become unstoppable. There is a special kind of freedom that comes from facing what you once feared. You feel lighter, you feel clearer, you feel stronger. The world seems less intimidating because you've proven to yourself that you can handle discomfort. And that realization changes how you approach every aspect of your life. You stop negotiating with your excuses. You stop letting fear create your limits. You stop allowing hesitation to dictate your choices. You begin to live with a sense of power that comes from knowing you can trust yourself to act. Self-trust is built one decision at a time. Each time you confront something you avoided, you strengthen the bond you have with yourself. You show yourself that your word matters. You show yourself that you are reliable, resilient, and disciplined. You create a pattern of courage that becomes part of your identity. And identity is everything. You will never consistently act in a way that contradicts who you believe you are. If you see yourself as someone who avoids, you will avoid. If you see yourself as someone who hesitates, you will hesitate. If you see yourself as someone who runs from responsibility, you will run. But if you see yourself as someone who confronts challenges, you will confront them. If you see yourself as someone who grows through discomfort, you will grow. If you see yourself as someone who takes action despite fear, then nothing can stop you. Your identity is shaped by your actions, not your thoughts, not your intentions, not your promises, your actions. And the actions that shape you most are the ones you take when every part of you wants to avoid. That is where character is forged. That is where strength is born. That is where power is developed. Avoidance is not the enemy. Avoidance is the training ground. It shows you where your work is. It shows you where your next level lies. It shows you what scares you, and fear always marks the boundary of your potential. When you step over that boundary, you expand. And when you expand, your life expands with you. You become the type of person who makes decisions instead of delaying them. You become the type of person who addresses problems before they grow. You become the type of person who faces truth instead of hiding from it. You become the type of person who walks directly toward the things they once feared. That kind of person becomes unstoppable because nothing inside them is working against them anymore. You do not need perfection. You do not need fearlessness. You do not need instant confidence. You only need the willingness to act before you feel ready. That willingness changes everything. So today, choose one thing you have been avoiding. Not 10 things, not all things. One. Face it, handle it, do it. And when you finish, choose another, and then another, and then another. This is how you break the cycle. This is how you build momentum. This is how you transform avoidance into motivation. Every time you act, you weaken avoidance's hold. Every time you confront fear, you strengthen your power. And every time you choose courage over escape, you reshape your identity into someone worthy of the life you want to live. Avoidance is not a curse. It is a guide. It shows you the path. It reveals your next step. It tells you where your potential is waiting. Follow it. Move toward it. Use it. And when you do, you will discover something extraordinary. The very things you once ran from were the things that were meant to set you free.